10 minutos, ok. Samara Iraeta, ¿verdad?
Sí, okay, te voy a preguntar el primer question. In detail, what do you remember growing up in El Salvador and how much did the war impact you throughout your childhood?
Mucho. No me acuerdo de mucho, pero I guess thinking about it going back, I'll be coming thanks to me. Tenía, what, 9 años, I think, cuando empezó la guerra. 9. Stop it. 9, hermana, tú tenías, hold on.
No, está bien, no, sigue.
9 o 10, I guess. I don't remember. Yes.
A ver, hagamos cuentas del 79, 76 al 86, 10.
11 años, 11, 12 años.
12 años, yo tenía 15.
Ahorita te pregunto.
No, para que lo que no estoy diciendo
Está
para.
bien, pero está bien, así lo dejo.
Are you gonna fix it up? Porque
Yeah,
they're gonna be making fun of me. No me acuerdo mucho. Me acuerdo cuando llegaron, que toda la semana nos estuvieron haciendo tortillas. Y mi hermana y yo habíamos hecho que una semana hacía tortillas una y la otra. Y me tocó a mí cuando llegó la guerrilla. Marcelino. Y lo más espantoso fue de eso, que me daba mucho nervio, que el soldado estaba enfrente y la guerrilla en el back.
¿Qué es la guerrilla?
La guerrilla era la FMLN.
Oh.
Los que estaban peleando con los soldados.
Oh, sí, ¿verdad?
Ay, no. Es ok.
No, nomás es para mi profesor.
Y mi abuela, todo el mundo se fue del pueblo, del cantón.
Ajá.
Y my grandma, she didn't want to go. Because I don't know, she likes the FMLN,
Ajá.
que era el contrario de los soldados.
Sí.
Nos quedamos y nos tocó hacer tortillas y cuidar a un muchacho de la universidad que tenía reventado el oído de tanta bomba que le pegaba cerca.
Oh, sí.
Oh my God. Yo me estoy acordando un montón.
Mira.
En su momento, estuvieron ¿cómo se dice? El enfrentamiento ellos y nos tocó quedarnos adentro. Nomás se oía que las balas tronaban. Unos nervios, miedo, de todo. Duré muchos años que no podía escuchar ruido de bomba o algo jodido así porque me espantaba feo.
Sí.
Mucho trauma.
Oh, sí.
¿Qué más?
Si quieres te puedo preguntar la siguiente.
Dale.
A ver, from where you live, can you describe what it used to look like? For instance, whether it was like rural, como se miraba todo country.
Se miraba abandonado, un río chiquito, seco, caliente. Era un cantón bien pobre.
Sí.
Seco todo, un calor enorme.
Sí.
Seco. Vivíamos en una casa no eran lo que se puede decir pobreza aquí, allá era pero peor.
Oh, peor. Sí, y puedes mirar escuelas o hospitales cerca, como había.
Solo la escuela.
¿Y hospitales no habían? Ok. No, tú no preguntas a mami.
No me acuerdo. No había hospital.
No.
No había hospital en el pueblo de nosotros. Teníamos que ir hasta el pueblo siguiente.
Sí,
para
La ciudad chimosa.
Oh my God.
Mami, ahorita te pregunto.
Eso sí, hasta la ciudad teníamos que ir. Estaba lejos.
Sí.
La escuela nos tocaba viajar lejos de la escuela también.
Sí. Necesitabas. ¿Y te fuiste como en carro?
Íbamos en un carro. Que pasaba una vez en el día y nos tocaba ir colgadas en el carro porque iba bien lleno.
Oh my God.
Y si nos perdíamos, teníamos que regresar caminando.
Qué feo. A ver. How did you grow? My next question is like, how did you grow up financially? Did war impact your finance for the worse or the better?
The worst.
The worst.
Porque como quiera vivíamos con mi abuela y no teníamos la economía suficiente. Our dad and mom just left
Que
us.
nos abandonó nuestra madre y nuestro padre.
Ahorita
That's what I'm saying, bro. Que nos abandonaron y pues era muy difícil la economía. We didn't have any.
No.
Nothing. Me tocó un momento de repasar hasta los vestidos de Roxana, de Norma, de mi prima y de todo el mundo. Zapatos con hoyos. Todo.
No. Ok, ¿podías entender escuela, verdad? Esta es la siguiente pregunta. If you were able to attend school, what was your educational life like? How were you able to learn, or where did you stop learning?
Fui hasta el 9 grado. Hasta el 9 grado. Agua oscura school. Agua oscura. Pero no, la abuela no nos dejaba hacer eso, pero sí me impactó bastante. Gracias a ello, I guess, I got what I got. Pero solamente pudimos hacer el 9.
You were able to do it until 9th grade?
9th grade.
Yeah. And how was like the education like, would you say? Strict?
Very strict.
And would you say you learned a lot, like basic writing,
Sí,
reading?
sí, porque me gustaba mucho, me daba mucho gustar meterme en cosas de dibujo, lectura. Y me acuerdo que en un tiempo me puse a hacer ortografía, que habían concursos de ortografía.
Sí.
Me metía muchas cosas de eso, pero unfortunately mi abuela no me dejaba participar.
Sí.
Pero a mí me encantaba la escuela, me encantaba todo eso. Y sí, siento que era muy buena escuela.
Sí.
Los maestros eran bien estrictos, by the way.
Sí.
Muy estrictos. Ellos daban una regla.
Sí.
Si no aprendíamos ni dábamos tarea, nos pegaban.
Yeah.
Porque los padres, la abuela daban permiso en ese tiempo, la familia daban permiso.
Sí. Were you, did the school ever like, you know, I'm gonna say, did you learn more about the war from school or from people around you?
From the people around me.
From the people around you?
For the people around us, because what we live in the cantoncito.
Yeah, and would you say it impacted how you like think politically when it comes to the war? Like, were you with the army or were you with the ¿cómo se dice?
FMLN.
FMLN.
Both of them.
Both of them?
Yeah, pero mi abuela jalaba más para FMLN.
Sí.
Es que nos tenía un poco aislados en The Way.
Sí.
On The Way nos tenían aislada, lo que la gente repetía nada más, pero realmente yo en lo personal nunca supe por qué realmente peleaban.
Sí.
O por qué era la guerra. Eso no.
Sí, la escuela no te enseñó nada de eso.
La escuela no enseñaba nada de eso.
Okay, the next one is, have you ever personally experienced, witnessed, or heard secondhand of violence of the war, and how did it emotionally impact you?
No, solamente cuando estuvimos ahí que te dije que estábamos en medio mientras estaba ese ataque, nervios, miedo.
Sí.
Mucho miedo, la verdad.
Ya.
Me duró mucho tiempo el trauma de que no escuchaba ruidos y yo me espantaba.
Sí.
Sí. No podía dormir.
No. Y no había nadie, like...
¿Una ayuda para nosotros?
No.
Nada.
Okay, what precautions must you take every day when you travel out in El Salvador, or would you say that you still do it now? Like,
No he regresado más.
Sí.
Fui en 2007, pero estaba tranquilo, no.
Sí, pero ¿qué practicaste en El Salvador que durante ese tiempo que hiciste para protegerte tú mismo?
No, solamente nos cubrían en casa, dentro de casa no salíamos.
¿Sí?
No salíamos para nada.
No.
Nunca nos dejaba salir la abuela, la verdad.
No. Sí,
porque el FMLN se llevaba a los jovencitos y a los niños.
Sí.
Por lo menos la señora, eso no nos dejaba salir.
Sí.
Estaba pendiente de nosotros, porque estábamos chiquillos.
Sí, y ustedes van a querer pues explorar. Sí, entonces puedes decir que has agarrado ese trauma y lo puedes decir, todavía lo tienes ahorita.
Ay, sí, yo creo.
Sí.
Ya, muchas secuelas, el no dormir, los nervios, la impaciencia.
Ya.
Viene de eso.
Sí. It says, how did the trauma from the war impact you when you were young and compared to it to now?
Pues no sé, ¿cómo te digo? No sé, esa pregunta de ahora entonces. Sí, estaba bien pequeña.
Sí.
Sí, los cambios han sido, pero sí ha impactado mucho los miedos.
Sí.
Esos miedos, sí. Y puedo decirte que ahora sí he crecido más en ese aspecto.
Sí.
Sí.
¿Como piensas algo que pensaste que fue normal en El Salvador y no es en Estados Unidos?
Que fue la suerte, pero como en eso estábamos pequeñas, nunca lo vi. Es difícil contestar esa pregunta, porque pasó en un momento de que no es normal, pero,
sí.
Pero a la misma vez pensábamos que era algo así.
Sí, que
normal.
todo lugar es normal así.
Lo hacían, sí.
Ajá. El siguiente question is, can you reveal the main reason for leaving El Salvador and if the war was part of the reason?
La familia se separó, toda la familia, crecimos con abuelas. Sí, no tuvo que ver la guerra, pero sí y no. Porque cuando ya cumplí los 13 años, ya todo el mundo ya se había ido a mi hermana, ya me sentía sola, entonces eso fue que cambió que yo viniera para acá.
Sí.
Sí, podría decir que sí.
Sí, como porque todo está pasando y te necesitabas ir porque no puedes estar solita.
No, pues, ajá.
Sí.
Sí.
Okay, the next question is, can you describe how you were able to leave your home country and reach to the country you plan to stay in?
Pues se me hizo fácil porque como yo soy de aquí,
Uh-huh.
de California, se hizo fácil venir para acá.
Oh, you were born in California, pero you just happened to go back?
Sí.
Oh.
Se hizo fácil venir para acá, no fue un problema.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Did you originally plan to stay where you originally plan to stay where you are now for this long, or were you going to go back to El Salvador after the war finished?
No, I'm gonna stay here.
You want to stay here?
Voy a ir a visitarlo, un día tengo que ir a visitarlo, porque ahora sí está bonito, es lo que dice.
Sí. Okay, dice, after the war ended for decades, would you say that El Salvador has gotten better, and how can you describe whether it has or hasn't?
I haven't been back to El Salvador, but I believe I got a friend that she said it's beautiful now.
Yeah.
It's safer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No hay pandillas, no hay guerra. No viví nada de las pandillas, pero sí viví la guerra. Pero nada de eso no hay secuelas, nada de eso.
No. ¿Y dices que quieres regresar?
Me gustaría regresar.
Sí, pero vivir permanente o nomás visitar.
Viajar, a visitar.
¿Nomás visitar?
Sí,
Ya.
a visitar. Ya me crecí aquí, ya
Sí.
estoy aquí.
Y ya estás acostumbrado más aquí.
Sí, ya no creo que pueda encontrar vida allá en El Salvador.
Oh, okay. Sí. Pues gracias, tía. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Así. ¿Cómo te llamas, mami? ¿Cómo te llamas?
Roxana Campos.
Ok, te voy a preguntar las preguntas. El primero es, in detail, what do you remember growing up in El Salvador and how much did the war impact you throughout your childhood?
Mi no habla inglés.
Ay. Puedes decir qué te recuerdas creciendo en El Salvador y cómo puedes decir que te ha reimpactado tu vida.
Pues en El
creciendo
Salvador
ahí.
crecí con mi abuela materna, porque mi madre y mi padre se separaron, se divorciaron y nos abandonaron. Y nosotros nos criamos con... ¿A what? Con la abuela materna. Y fuimos unas muchachas humildes, pobres. Y de lo que yo me acuerdo de la guerra fue de que afectó mucho en la pobreza.
Sí.
Sí. Cuando comenzó la ofensiva grande fue en noviembre de 1989, que fue la guerra más grande, que atacaron a todo el país.
Sí.
Tanto los militares como el FMLN. Fue algo bien de miedo porque mirábamos los helicópteros que tiraban balas.
Sí.
Y una vez atacaron el cantón donde nosotros somos. Llegaron los de la militar.
Sí.
A atacar porque decían que allí estaban los de la guerrilla. Y no era cierto.
Sí.
Y fue bien feo porque se oían bombas, balazos. Nos metimos debajo de una hornilla que era como una cocina,
Sí.
pero de cemento.
El siguiente es por dónde te viviste, cómo se miraba. Puedes decir que fue como de los cities o los...
No, era un cantón, era un pueblo chiquito.
Sí.
Pobre.
¿Y puedes decir que había escuelas o
No,
hospitales?
no había hospitales, solo había una escuela chiquita.
Pues chiquita y...
Para el hospital estaba 45 minutos de donde nosotros éramos a la ciudad.
Sí.
Sí.
Y puedes decir que podían ir había una vez que fuiste al hospital de ahí o
No, nunca fuimos,
no.
gracias a Dios. No.
No. Ok, la siguiente pregunta es ¿cómo creciste como en dinero, como pobres
Sí.
y puedes decir si el guerra lo hizo peor o mejor?
Pues desde que yo me acuerdo el país ya estaba pobre.
Ya estaba
No
pobre.
se puede decir si fue la guerrilla o fue el ejército porque pues realmente no se sabe por qué razón era la guerra.
Sí.
Entonces no se puede decir que fue por la guerra, no.
Okay. El siguiente pregunta es si atendiste escuela, ¿cómo aprendiste ahí? ¿Qué aprendiste ahí en esa escuela?
La escuela nos quedaba 30 minutos en carro. Íbamos del pueblo a otro pueblo.
Sí.
Y solo estudié hasta el 9º grado.
Sí, hasta el 90 grados. ¿Y puedes decir cómo aprendiste ahí? ¿Cómo fue que te faltaba aprender o...?
Muchas cosas nos faltaron.
Sí, sentías que había mucho que le faltaban decir o que nomás había limitados que...
Era limitado todo.
Sí. Ok, si pudiste aprender más de la guerra de la escuela o personas que estabas...
Pues de la guerra no se hablaba en la escuela.
¿No te dejaron?
No dejaba, no hablaba nadie de la guerra.
Okay. ¿Y aprendiste más como tu familia o tus amigos, vecinos?
Pues sí, con los vecinos.
Sí.
Se hablaba de la guerra, sí.
Sí. ¿Te recuerdas cómo hablaron, cómo ellos soportaron los que un lado del otro o qué? ¿No te recuerdas? Okay. Estoy preguntando que si has have you ever personally experienced, witnessed or heard secondhand violence of the war, or did it emotionally impact you? Como estoy preguntando.
Sí, porque no nos dejaban salir.
Sí.
Porque había mucha violencia que supuestamente lo hacían los guerrilleros, pero no era cierto, en veces era el ejército el que hacía tanta maldad.
Sí.
Sí.
Sí, ¿has mirado personas que han peleado por eso o has escuchado que había unas familias que tenían persona en este grupo y no puede y pues se murieron por estar ahí?
Pues nunca vi gente muerta ni nada de eso, pero sí se oía de que sí mataban a la gente, que tanto el ejército reclutaba a los jóvenes como la guerrilla se llevaba a la gente joven.
¿Sí? ¿Y puedes decir, te ha asustado que eso pasaba? Like that it scared you? Okay. Okay, ¿cuál estamos? ¿Qué hiciste todos los días para cuidarte tú mismo, para protegerte en el guerra?
No nos dejaban salir, solo teníamos un río enfrente de la casa, íbamos al río a bañarnos, regresábamos a la casa, íbamos a la escuela, regresábamos y cuando mi abuela escuchaba que decían que andaba la guerrilla cerca, no nos dejaba ir a la escuela.
No. Y decías que tu abuela has your grandma ever made you practice I don't know, an emergency where she says, están cercas, algo así, y te ponen a hacer algo o nomás te dejan?
No nos dejaban salir.
No, nomás no te dejan salir. Y puedes decir que todavía lo haces ahorita, como no sales cuando escuchas algo que está pasando feo.
No.
¿Todavía sales?
Pues es que estoy en diferente país. No estoy allá en mi país. Este país es muy diferente.
Está preguntando cómo tu trauma de la guerra te han impactado cuando estabas chiquita y puedes decir es diferente ahorita, como de la edad que tienes ahorita?
La verdad ya ni me acordaba.
¿Y no te recuerdas la trama?
No,
No, como...
porque en eso yo emigré para este país. No me afectó mucho. Mm, Porque fue la mera guerra fue en el 89, noviembre del 89. Y yo emigré a este país en el 1992. Entonces no.
No, te llevas más sano, pues más sano aquí que en El Salvador.
Sí.
Sí, que ya no te sentías miedosa que cuando llegaste aquí que estabas en El Salvador. Ok, ¿cómo pudiste de salir de El Salvador y cómo llegaste aquí?
Salí de inmigrante, salí de mi país pasamos por Guatemala, luego emigramos a México y de México para Estados Unidos,
Sí.
por medio de bus.
¿Y cuánto te tardó?
Una semana.
¿Una semana?
Ujú.
No más una semana, like, not even a small field trip, like, you didn't...
Una semana.
¿En carro?
En bus.
¿En bus?
Ujú.
Y originalmente te querías quedarte en Estados Unidos o que querías regresarte cuando ya terminó la guerra en El Salvador.
No, me gustó este país y me quedé en este país.
Sí.
Sí.
Sí, y después cuando escuchaste que guerra se terminó, ¿no has pensado que wow, ya puedo regresar?
No,
No.
ni quiero.
Ok, y la última pregunta es, ¿puedes decir que después de este tiempo, puedes decir que El Salvador ya se ha mejorado o puedes decir que ya se hizo peor?
No, ahorita está el país, es un país seguro por el nuevo presidente que tenemos y sí me gustaría un día regresar a visitar a mi país, pero a visitarlo, no quedarme.
¿No quedarte?
No. Pero bueno, un día, no sé cuándo.
Okay. Muchas gracias, mami.
Ay, por fin. Ay, porque ya.
Hi, my name is Damaris Rodriguez, and I'm doing this interview project about the Salvadorian Civil War. And I chose this historical event, because I'm Salvadorian, and I didn't really grew up in Salvador. I never went there before, so I'm like curious on like the historical events, the culture. And not only that, I also want to learn more from my family's perspective, who did grow up and who are born and raised in Salvador. So the two people who I interviewed for this project are my mother and my aunt. I chose them. I chose them for this project because, well, they were born and raised over there, and not only that, we get different perspectives from my mom, who were born and raised over there, and from my aunt, who was born in the United States, but who went to all the way to Salvador to live with my mom and her family, but she was raised over there. So we see a shift of perspective between like United States and in Salvador from her. So before and during the 1970s, El Salvador had a political or like imbalance. So basically, there was a government who was ruled by like rich elites, and then there was a big gap between them and their citizens who happened to be poor. No, that's wrong. During the 1970s, El Salvador's government was dominated by a small and elite group that profited from coffee, resulting in a significant gap between the wealthy and the poor. Before the Civil War started, the lower class and indigenous people were led by a group led by a group who was founded by Agustin Farabundo Martí in 1932. But the group was actively killed by the military. In 1979, the civil war in El Salvador began as a social group, such as that is called Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. They rebelled against the government and the military to achieve social and economic change. This had led to thousands of deaths in the 1980s because the military was killing anyone who supported or might have belonged in the social group, and they also killed off whoever seemed too indigenous. Throughout the war, the number of deaths increased over time as the military killed whoever supported the social group and indigenous. And FMLN, which actively attacked the army and the government and killed who was pro-government or military. So basically the group would also do the killing, and they would also actively go around towns, pueblos, and have force young adult men, young children to work or fight for them, and if they don't, most of the time it leads to a lot of death. And it gotten so much worse because the United States has supported El Salvador government, which have kept the war going longer due to military aid and funds. In 1989, the guerrillas who joined FMLN attacked the capital, San Salvador. It was shown by both sides of the war that military victory was impossible to achieve for either side. In July 1990, both government of El Salvador and FMLN signed the San Jose Agreement on Human Rights. During this year, the United States stopped its funding to El Salvador's government because the United Nations became involved, and it was confirmed that the violation of human rights violation has occurred. On January 16, 1992, finally the war ended between two sides by signing El Salvador's peace agreement, which led FMLN to become a political group in El Salvador. I was able to find, or what helped me to find these, to learn more about the historical events, is from YouTube. The title is named The Salvador Civil War, A Nation Torn Apart, that was uploaded from Armies of the Past. And then another one was El Salvador Civil War. It was the author was Maureen Kane, and the third website I looked was El Salvador Civil War Explained: Background and History. That was uploaded by Kristen Jagcook. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Okay, I interviewed first my tia Samara. When I asked her the questions, she first told me how she just started remembering about Salvador and the trauma. The trauma barely started coming to her. And she was first telling me that what she remembered from the war is the bombing, the gunshots, how they were in the warehouse while it all happens, and how after that it really impacted her traumatically throughout her childhood, as she couldn't no longer hear a gunshot unless she gets like a panic attack during El Salvador. And she wasn't aware it was a panic attack in El Salvador. And then she goes on explaining how she grew up financially struggling in El Salvador, and she doesn't remember what age she became aware that there was a war. She said it was around when she was 11, 12, and she started discussing like how she grew up in a very isolated small town, that there was no hospitals around. There was a small school with strict teachers, but despite with the strict teachers, she really loved the education there. She loved learning there. But she never really learned more about the war, like deep down, like more in depth. She never really learned what caused the war to start. The school never explained it. The school wouldn't allow her from what she told. She had to learn it from her neighbors, her grandma. She told me that her grandma didn't support. Her grandma supported the element. Supported the forgetting what's the name. She supported the FMLN. She supported the FMLN. From what she said, that she supported both. They both had their rights and wrong, you know. From what she remember, like, she never really experienced or have anyone really experience the war secondhandly. They only heard about it. They never really had didn't really personally have military like coming over and started killing people. Thankfully so. But she did have like a small glimpse of it that one time where she was in a hut or in like a big building where everybody was in while they heard gunshots. She was explaining how she didn't really take precautions other than her grandma. Her grandma like forced all of her siblings going to their house and staying there. They couldn't leave the house without permission, and then at night they had to be at home because her grandma was aware of the war and she didn't want anything to happen to them, reasonably so. And she goes on about how the reason she left El Salvador was at first she said it wasn't because of the war, but then she realized that because of the war everybody started leaving, like her siblings started leaving, and she felt alone during the war. So she left to America, and she said that how she was able to go to America was that she was born in America, so she was able to like go back legally, and she doesn't really plan to. She only plans to visit El Salvador, never really go back and living there, because she doesn't see it. She doesn't see it like her home country. She just sees it like a second home, but her first home was like, I don't know. And then she goes on saying how from her perspective El Salvador does look better, a lot safer. But that was really it as a summary from my aunt. And then for my mom, who was born and raised in El Salvador, she goes on explaining how about her family, her sibling, where she was raised with her siblings. Her parents abandoned her with her grandma, so she grew up with her grandma. She was going on saying that she grew up poor because of the war going on, and also because the government really doesn't have any assistance for low financially income houses. She was saying how she has a sense of nostalgia, remembering like the river behind her house. She goes on about during the war. She doesn't. From my mother's interview, she was explaining how, and she grew up in El Salvador. She grew up with her maternal grandma, and she grew up with her siblings. She grew up poor, and she goes on explaining how the war really didn't impact. She really doesn't know if the war impacted the economy of her country. She said it just happens to be. She just said it just happens to be poor in general. She goes on explaining how she remembers key moments in the war more. She remembers how there was military going over to her hometown, and that they thought that the I keep forgetting it. The FMLN they believe the military thought the FMLN was at their hometown, but in reality it wasn't. So it caused a huge scare for people in that hometown, including my mom, and they had to hide. And she remembers the school. She remembers that there was the nearest hospital she had was 3 hours away, and she 3 hours away in a car, and that she had to go to different towns to get treated medically wise, and that she only had one school in her hometown and that she attended. But when I asked her when she learned about the war, about if she where she learned about more about the war, she said she really didn't learn it from school because they weren't allowed to talk about it. They learned it more of her neighbors, and she doesn't really have a side. She doesn't really lean politically which side to go with. She just understands that both sides are causing the both sides just kills people in general, and she's scared of them either way. She remembers how the war she remembers leaving because she got married, and then her husband was going to go to El Salvador, so she went with them. It took her a whole week. There was no difficulty moving from El Salvador to the United States where they were planned to stay. Thankfully so. And the main part was because of not the main part was the Civil War, but it was just mainly how she saw the land of opportunity and she took that chance to go to the United States. But she does miss her home country. She did agree that it has gotten better, that the president there does care about their people. So there's a lot more regulation, safety, and protectiveness for the citizens there. But like my aunt said, she will plan. She goes on explaining how she does miss Salvador and she would go visit, but she will not go back because she feels a lot more safer here in the United States despite of the current political problem going on, but she just doesn't see herself staying and living there no more. And so they both share similarities in a sense of how they grew up, since they both are siblings. So they grew up poor. They grew up with their grandma. They grew up knowing about the war, but not too much of it, as they only learned from their neighbors and from their grandma. And they both share that they prefer staying at the United States where they currently stay at than going back, despite it being a lot safer and there's better improvement with the new president. But the differences between both my mom and my aunt is that my mom remembered more in detail of what was happening as she stayed there throughout her life, as she remembered the military coming towards their hometown because the military believed that the FMLN was at their hometown staying and hiding. My tia, she only remembers the gunshots, the helicopters, and how she was scared of them. She wasn't aware what was happening as my mom was older, and my aunt just happens to come from the United States to now to El Salvador. Sorry. To where I'm like, I don't know. So when my mom's for what is new to me is that my mom does remember how the military did think the FMLN is at their hometown. I don't think she was aware of the huge massacre. The the they both really don't know the main reason of the civil war, because they just said that against, like, FMLN was against the government, and the military was for the government, and they will kill anyone who's from FMLN because they are rebelling against them. The difference is that my aunt believes that she was for the military, despite her grandma being uh, towards the FMLN. We can see that there is her grandma really didn't influence her politically wise. My mom, she stands and neither, as she never really, as she wasn't really more aware of what was happening. She heard of it, she never witnessed it, she just happened to be around it, surrounding it. And my aunt had her own views. But I did learn about this events in history from both of my family members' perspective is that they did grow up in fear. They grew up in fear, but they weren't aware of the main reasons, as they grew up isolated from everybody, from like old towns. I learned that old towns are most definitely different, because they probably, as every town has their own experience, because where my family grew up, grew up in San Miguel, and it seems like San Miguel didn't really wasn't fully a part of the war. They just happened that instance that my parents remembered before leaving was the main thing, was like the main thing that happened from the Civil War. But after that, they just grew more. They just happened to be more aware, but they didn't learn more deeply about it. The people, their hometown people, just, I guess their hometown people didn't really know more either, as they did verbalize what they think, but they avoided problems, so they stood away, they isolated themselves. They had opinions, but they never took actions against government or for government. So yes, this is what I learned from this interview, that every town are different, as some are very more isolated to stay away from the Civil War, to stay away from problems, and that there were still people who were low income, did believe that they were for the military, as they believed in structure, and that there shouldn't be so persevering this personal story is important to history, because you have people who have secondly witnessed or happen to be bystanders to the Civil War, and there were people who lived throughout that war, and as a person who didn't grow up in El Salvador and didn't wasn't born around that time either, learn more deep what happened second hand from family members who still who has trauma, who who can give you more in detail what really happens than people who hasn't are just saying stuff from what it seems, when there's different perspectives, different opinions, and different people who witness from a different light. So yes, this is my interview project. Thank you.